Hi everyone, welcome back to Pine Hollow Auto Diagnostics Beached Whale parking lot. What do we have today? 2004 Chrysler Crossfire. One of these Mercedes Chrysler two-door sporty things, V6, towed all the way from Indiana, about 10 hours away. The customer said the history of this thing. So last year, almost a year ago, he said he was having some battery charging problems. Like the car would just stall out and it would try to crank and it was just like low power. Then he took it to a shop. I think they replaced the battery once or twice. It was there for a month, 2 months, and eventually now it's a no crank. So the car's been off the road for almost a year. The customer, it's not his primary vehicle, it's just his, fun vehicle. But he wants it fixed. I asked him, did they replace the alternator? Like, what's the deal? He said, nope, just the battery, and apparently now it doesn't even crank. So, battery maintainer, Tornado 90,000, putting out the amps, 13.5 volts. Keys on. I did check the engine oil. We have plenty of oil on the dipstick. Alternator seems to move, and it definitely doesn't do anything when you turn the key to crank. And I'll show you. So key off, key on, crank, nothing. We can try it in, for some reason, I can't get it out of park, even with the key on and the brake pedal depressed. The radio, stupid aftermarket radio, keeps doing some weird stuff. All the warning lights are on. He said to get it out of park you have to push the little safety lock there. So, okay. Scan it for codes. Now I don't know how good the ThinkTool Pros is going to be on this hybrid European-American vehicle. We can't talk to transmission control module. We can't talk to the ESP stability program. That's kind of weird. Tire pressure monitoring system. Don't really care about these codes. But PCM, no codes. This radio is really starting to annoy me. It's like turning the speakers on and off. It is not a convertible, so we don't have the power top module. Brake assist system, not sure how that's wired in or if it has it. Shift level assembly module. Electronic stability program. So let me take a picture of this. Let's go online, do some research on the starting system, see what the car needs to have to at least crank over. Because right now it's totally dead, but the engine computer is not setting any trouble codes, which is kind of strange. So, time for some research. Alright, let's take a look at the starting system for this Chrysler Crossfire. This is the OE diagram. You can see in start, we should have voltage. We don't have the manual transmission, so it'll go on this AT wire to the PCM and to this pulse module. Then the pulse module, whatever that is, energizes the starter motor. The redrawn diagram actually shows more details of the pulse module. It has two inputs from start. There's a battery positive, that's the big 50 amp fuse to energize the solenoid. Then ignition switch in start or run, you should have power here. And then in crank, you should have power on this violet wire. So here's the PCM. So the PCM also receives the start input from the switch, from the ignition switch. And then I don't see a park neutral switch, but that could be in the TCM, which is offline. And then the PCM says sensor ground. That's very misleading. I think that's the command wire from the PCM saying, okay, it's okay to, crank, and then boom, the solenoid engages. So if we can get to this pulse module, side of underhood accessory fuse block, we can do all the checks right at this module. I think that'll be a great place to see if we have inputs and if we have outputs. Computer data lines, I was just curious how this car is wired. It does have CAN lines, you know, two-wire CAN between the powertrain, the transmission controller, the shift lever assembly, the ABS. These are all, this one's offline, this one's offline, this one's offline, and then the Sentry key module, that's online, but you can see that it can talk on pin 1 of the DLC through the SCI, and it's not setting any codes. We don't have any communication codes, which is very strange. If the CAN was down, I would expect the PCM to set some kind of communication code. Instrument cluster is online, again SCI trans to pin 15, and you can see the CAN is actually just in between the modules. It does not talk directly to the data link connector. Kind of a interesting network topology here, but let's start here, find this pulse module. We can manually energize the solenoid, see if the car starts and runs, if it's charging, what's going on there, and we'll think of the next test. Alright, we've successfully located the pulse module, thing that controls the starter. It does live by the fuse box. You have to take the whole cover off, and it slides in right here, so we can check all the wires right here. Let's identify. So this violet and white, the fatter one, that's the one that goes to our starter motor. So we can manually energize the starter, see if the starter even works. Then there's a power, that's the pin A, that's the big black wire, okay. Then pin 2, pink and red, that comes from the PCM. I don't know if that's a variable signal. We can put a scope on there. Blue and red, or blue and green rather, that's pin 3. And B, let's see here. So we have pink and red, and then brown is pin 5. That should be a good ground. That's this one right here. Then, what else are we missing? Violet, so this should come from the ignition switch, should be hot and crank. And then red and white, or pink and red, that should be on B2 right here, pink and red, that should be hot and run or start. Easy to check. Alright, let's do some voltage checks with the test light. Alright, I'm just using an extension. We have good power and ground here. So first, test light from battery positive. Let's check that we have continuity through the starter. That's this purple and white. Indeed we do. Okay, that's good. Now let's check this ground. That is also good. Test light from battery ground. Let's check if we have a power on the black wire. Yes. Now let's see if we have ignition power on the pink and red. That would be this one right here. So let me set this up so we can see it in the window. When the key is on, I just turn the key on. Yes, that lights up. Now the violet wire, that should be hot when we turn it to crank. We crank it. Okay, that's good. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 wires checked. Let's send power to the starter, make sure the starter motor works. Alright, so through a fuse from battery positive, I have it clipped right here to my test light, and the test light is grounded, so we know we have good power here. Now this tip is 12 volts fused. Let's touch the starter motor wire, see what happens. Okay. It actually starts and runs. Let's see what the voltage is if we turn off our charger. 14.3. So it's working. And here the alternator's putting out pretty good. We can measure the amps. We got the car started. That's a good thing. Let's see how many amps the battery is accepting. About 6 amps. Okay. I think the air pump's running, or whatever emission system it has. Let's let it run for a little bit, warm up. So now the question is, why doesn't it crank? Okay, there goes the air pump. Let's see if it stays running. It sounds a little... I don't know if it's misfiring or what it's doing, but all the warning lights are on. Okay, pretty smooth. So ABS. We still can't shift out of park. Very interesting. So indeed, I think the TCM is offline, not telling the PCM that we're in park, and then the PCM is saying, no, we're not going to crank anything. So there's probably a network problem where we're not getting any communication codes. Interesting. So the car ran for about 15 minutes. Everything was great. I shut it off, turn the key back on, and try to start it again. You can hear the starter trying to click, but it's not engaging. So let's see. If we go to our amp clamp and turn it to 400 amps, let's see if the starter is actually trying to draw current when we energize it. Zoom in on that. Okay, and here we go. What was it, like 80 amps? Interesting. The battery voltage is being maintained. Does that sound like a bad block ground, perhaps? So let's put a test light on the block while we do that experiment and see if it lights up when the starter's trying to turn. Alright, so I tightened up the battery terminals to eliminate that variable. And now, crank no start. Okay, so that's probably the original customer complaint. Let's plug in this pulse module and see if it cranks from the key or not. I suspect it won't. We have to kind of keep going through the steps. Okay, so I have some data pulled up. We have intake air temp, brake light switch. So I'm not sure, this does not change when you push the brake pedal, but the brake lights do work. Coolant temp and engine RPM. So I'm going to crank it, see if we see engine RPM. The other Chrysler Crossfire that we diagnosed that was stalled out and had a crank no start, that was a crankshaft position sensor that was going bad. So let's just crank it over, see if we see an RPM signal on the scanner. Alright, here we go. Let's see if it'll start or if we see an RPM. Okay. It does not mean the crankshaft position sensor is good. So I want to let this car cool down, maybe for a couple hours. We'll come back, do the same test, see if anything changes.